Hello and welcome to The Hill is Always Greener, a show where four friends have friendly, chill discussions about Sonic the Hedgehog to distract themselves from multiple things that we discussed before the podcast got started, and also the inevitable passage of time and our own rapidly waning ability to relate to the youth, now more so than ever. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. How's everyone doing today?
Well, hi there.
I'm Faulerro.
I'm Rock the Jake.
I'm Cyberlink.
I'm Game Buddy.
And that's all of us. This is episode 32. We've made it to 32. And this is the 32nd, this month, release of this episode is the 32nd anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog 1, the beginning of it all. And I just think that's pretty significant.
You are not wrong.
In a few more years, he'll be legally old enough to run for president.
Oh.
If we don't act fast, sir, they'll elect Sonic president!
A better future is possible.
My first decree is chili dogs.
And that's about it.
I mean, that's about the best you could ask for. But, as far as potential celebrities running for office, I think Sonic the Hedgehog is one of the milder options. But anyway, but no, what we're actually talking... Ordinarily, we'd say about what's exciting Sonic things that we've been up to lately, but I don't think there's been much that we were willing to talk about on the show. But what we are going to talk about is our topic this week.
I've got a little bit, just a smidge.
Okay. We'll see. We'll have a look. We'll have a listen to Luke's smidge, and then we'll get on to the main topic. What happened to you recently, Luke?
So I went back down the rabbit hole of Sega rhythm games again. I went to the local arcade for a friend of the show, Derek's birthday party recently, and I actually got to try out two different rhythm games, both of which had Reach for the Stars among their available songs. The first was called, I believe it was called Tunithm. It's basically got like a touchscreen piano keys on the board, and it could sense if you were touching, but it could also sense if you had like your hands positioned above but not actually touching the pad. And so it's, coming down like an audio surf or Guitar Hero style thing. And I played Reach for the Stars on it, and it was different. It was definitely interesting. It was more straightforward than a lot of other rhythm games that I've played that have really bizarre control schemes. But it was cool playing along with that. I played, some Yakuza songs, All I Want from Crazy Taxi, stuff like that. It was neat. And then the other one was called Ongeki, I believe, which was so, this might have been one of the most bizarre rhythm games I've ever played, because you could either play left or right-handed, and it had 3 buttons on either side of the joystick so that you could control it. But then it also had some songs that on the higher difficulties, you'd have to use basically both sets of controls at once. And then also it had pads on the side that you had to hit instead of just normal buttons. And at the same time, you're trying to control a party of 3 RPG party members who are attacking a boss while all of this is happening, and you're moving around. It's basically like if you took that Kingdom Hearts rhythm game and then made it ridiculously fast and hard to parse. It's frightening. But again, Reach for the Stars was on there. That was interesting. I find it interesting that is the one Sonic song that keeps showing up in all these rhythm games. I don't know why.
Something about the quality of the song, I suppose. It's got a pretty frantic beat, I think. So maybe that's why they decide it's something that will be a challenge to do a little rhythm game to.
Well, that sounds neat.
It was something different, I'll give it that.
I kind of like this little update we've had to our arcade episode that we periodically get to hear about what new exciting Sonic-adjacent games that we've found in the wild.
Yeah, I do find it interesting that he tends to show up in very unexpected places. I did also play Mario and Sonic 2020 while I was there. That game still is... You run out of breath real quickly because you're running and when you're doing the sprinting events, you're not even doing proper strides. You're doing the NES track and field thing of just rapidly bouncing your feet up and down. Is not very ideal.
Resisting the temptation to use your hands on the floor.
Yeah, except it's a big, metal pad, so that doesn't work particularly well.
Blah.
And I also tried to play My My again, but the machine was broken this time. Oh, well.
Oh.
Just makes you think of the music video for She's a Maniac.
Yeah, it's literally exactly like that. But yeah, that was my instance of Sonic showing up in unexpected places.
Oh, I do like when he appears in the real world sometimes, just to surprise us. I want to see more Sonic-y arcade things. Like, we talked about it in at length in our arcade episode, but I like having more Sonic things out there.
Yeah.
Don't know about the rest of y'all.
No, I'm
into
in
it.
full agreement.
It's whimsical brand synergy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I suppose that brings us to our topic of I was about to say the week, but no, this is every 2 weeks, every fortnight.
Is that what a fortnight is?
God, when is Sonic going to show up in Fortnite? Yeah, we're both jumping for a joke like that.
I'm realizing that someday Sonic might show up in Fortnite and we'll have to actually find out what Fortnite is.
Sonic with a gun!
I feel like a lot of
done it
people
before.
have hopped onto Fortnite after, well, the thing I like is in it now, I guess I'll experience it, and they never came back.
I play Fortnite with some friends.
It also has its problems. I don't think it's as much of a horrible Skinner box like gacha games are, but it seems like a pretty competent game. Yeah, I know lots of people. You know why I don't think Sonic will ever happen? Because that is one thing about Fortnite is they are super dedicated to make sure all of their guest characters fit within that style, and Sonic characters are just too short. They gotta be humanoids.
They can't fit the model.
I thought you were going to say it's because Sonic won't use a gun.
No. They sell Nerf versions of Fortnite guns to children, so Sonic would be fine with one of those. No, I think they're too short. That's why, Goku looks perfectly fine next to, Rick Sanchez and a Xenomorph and Batman, but Sonic would be too short, so, oh well.
So what you're saying is that we should instead look forward to Eggman being playable. And speaking of which...
Hey!
Okay, so we're talking about Eggman this time. That is our topic for this episode. When we talked about it being the 32nd anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog 1, and you knew who else first made their appearance back then? It was the Eggman. So that's what we're talking about this time. The villain of all Sonic-y things. Well, maybe not all Sonic-y things, but most of them.
He is the Eggman. That's what he am.
I'm glad you read that, Jacob. The thing I put down in the outline.
I'm glad you wrote that, because sometimes I think about that song and I just think about saying it that way and it makes me smile.
Yes, Dr. Eggman is not always the villain in a Sonic story, but he is always the primary antagonist. He is a constant force.
Yeah, whether he is Eggman or Dr. Ivo/Evo Robotnik, the main villain of a 90s platformer series starring a blue anthropomorphic hedgehog is a rotund bald man with a large moustache who makes robots and loves theme parks. I read that verbatim from my outline, but it's pretty funny when you think about it. This is the villain of the Sonic games, is this big old guy with a giant tash.
He's loud, he's proud of himself, he likes being a spectacle.
He smells like eggs.
Yeah.
Well, that depends on the continuity, I think. Or maybe he does, but we just don't acknowledge it in modern games.
Yeah, I think that nobody with smell receptors gets that close to Eggman when you really think about it. It's like his robots.
Yeah, that's true.
And then, I don't know, maybe Sonic's in mid-homing attack, maybe he gets a whiff and he's like, oh boy. And you can interpret that however.
Or maybe he's just nose blind to it at this point.
Yeah. Anytime one of Sonic's new friends encounters Eggman, they're like, oh, Jesus! He's like, yeah, you get used to it.
Well, if we're talking about the story, the Golden Book, Sonic the Hedgehog, he's a horrible little trash goblin apparently, so that doesn't bother him. He's used to disgusting smells, so that's why he's the only hero who can take on Robotnik.
Yep.
I like how we're starting this episode all about Dr. Robotnik by being like, he probably smells bad.
His personal hygiene.
Yes, this is a call-out post for Dr. Eggman, real-life terrible bad guy. First on the docket, stinks. Secondly, did lots of war crimes and also tried to enslave all of humanity / furrinity.
That's a website.
So...
Third of all, bald.
Yeah, third of all, bald. Yeah, that's So, where do we start with Dr. Eggman.
Well, according to the spreadsheet and the analytics that we have available to us because of our secret headquarters now.
Oh.
Oops, did I say that out loud?
We have
insider trade secrets about how, believe it or not, Eggman was based on Theodore Roosevelt. I bet nobody's ever known that.
You cannot talk about insider trading on a Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh, crap.
That's too real right now.
I'm going to get arrested.
More than once. Send you to double jail.
The $5 billion double dollar man.
At one point, they were looking at different ideas for what they wanted their new mascot character to be, and the very, very earliest sketch of Eggman was one of these put forth as the, potential hero. But then they're like, maybe not, but we like this design. We're going to hang on to it. And not long after, ended up being the main villain. And I think history was made that day.
Yeah, it's just because I believe it's Naoto Oshima who designed the initial image here, which I've got it on the document so everyone can see this man with a big bushy mustache and pink polka dot pajamas, holding a little pillow, and I don't think he was supposed to be based on Theodore Roosevelt, or at least that's what Oshima himself has said. But he definitely bears a resemblance to at least one character from a Ghibli movie. I'm looking at this one from Laputa here, who has the little goggles, the big mustache, the bald head, and say one of many times that Laputa and Ghibli would be used as inspiration in Sonic the Hedgehog.
That would continue to be a thing years later. Like with Spirited Away, we obviously got, I believe his name was Komochi, the engineer guy?
Yeah, the one with the spider arms feeding the soot sprites down in the... Yes, yeah. I think he pops up in quite a few movies after La Puta. I know at least Spirited Away. I can't remember if he's in Porco Rosso as well, but he's just one of those guys that keeps popping up. And yes, very much looks like our modern version of Dr. Eggman.
It does make me wonder if that is, based on a caricature of a specific person.
Maybe they were basing it on Theodore Roosevelt. The long history of Teddy Roosevelt in anime and video games.
I will say, I really enjoy this initial design of, basically Sleepy Time Robotnik with the polka dot pajamas and everything. If Sega were to somehow make even just a little mini game or a mobile game that starred this version of Eggman, I'd be all about it, because I'm just what kind of dreamscape are you going to take me on, Sega? Whisk me away.
Eggman into dreams.
Yeah.
I want more weird Sonic spin-offs like that. And I feel like mobile games with you would have the branding of Sonic, but that would just be perfect for little experiments. Yeah, give me a little Nemo, but yes, it's Dr. Eggman having bad dreams.
There's something adorable about that, actually.
I love you've also got another that very early piece of Sonic concept art that Naoto Oshima posted the full version of on Twitter not too recently. I love the the bumblebee coloring on this giant goblin Eggman in the background.
Yeah, this guy clearly meant to be the main villain, but the design is very similar to what we would finally get. But I love that little bumblebee design, and he looks like he fits in across amongst all those weird monster characters and Madonna. Because it was that era of Sonic concept art. He looks like he fits in perfectly.
Some kind of bumblebee, Oni or devil, right next to Evil Glover.
Evil Glover. The game is actually about Bubble Man trying to put honeybees and other bees into robots to protect them because bees are endangered and stuff like that.
Really flipped it on its head for the final product.
Yeah.
Now I can't help but wonder if there has been any media appearance or like a comic or something where Eggman did dress up in either the pajamas or the bee suit, as part of a gag or something.
I feel like I've seen Eggman in pajamas in something. Was it used in the IDW one? Maybe the classic one.
I know in Mania Adventures he was wearing the pajamas from the Man of the Year short, but
yes, that's the one I recall as well. I don't think we've seen these polka dot jammies, unless I'm missing something. No, he's got the funny onesie in a Boom, that's for sure.
yeah.
And yeah, the Man of the Year jammy jams in Sonic Mania. Bring them back. They would fit on a modern Eggman as well, or a future classic story.
One of these days, perhaps.
This is the basis for what would be like several offshoots of Robotniks, because like we had classic Eggman, although we didn't know he was Eggman over here unless you had access to that material, I guess. I feel like the first one that stood out would be, like, as far as the offshoots that would be used in other continuities with wildly different designs, the first one that comes to mind is Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog Robotnik, who we have talked about in great detail before.
And we will still.
Speaking of Robotniks, I love with all my heart.
Still the world's sexiest fat man.
Yep.
As intended.
It was Dave posted, which I didn't recognize it, but I didn't reply. But, who would your fan cast for, like, Dr. Robotnik that isn't Jim Carrey? And I immediately thought, like, revisiting his music and also, like, videos, like, John Baldry could have done it. Like,
yeah.
I absolutely would have loved to see him, like, do at least a screen test, like, if he was still with us. But
yeah,
yes, I love Adventures Robotnik. Like, the John Baldry vocal interpretation, especially, like, colors my view of classic Robotnik a lot.
It's like one of those things where, like, if someone was coming into this without hearing about Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog Robotnik before, and I don't know how that's possible on the internet these days, but to really try and, like, distill down what it is about this version of Robotnik that stands out from all the others, it's really hard. Like, yeah, there's Long John Baldry's magnificent performance, rolling his R's and eating the scenery every time he's on screen, but they took the Greg Martin Robotnik and they sort of, like, stretched it out, played with the face and the body part. It's like they were playing Mario 64 and they were just pulling the face out. Like,
gave him a cone head.
Yeah, the cone head, the big long nose, the big orange moustache, They took the little cape design, and while technically he has a cape every now and then, and they just decided to give him, like, I think we've described it as like a target reticle on his belly, and little genie shoes for some reason. So, and the gloves and the
large voluptuous ass.
Yeah, like, it's a very notable part of his design. Like, if you look at the early concept art, they draw a lot of attention to his rear. And the animators, like, play with that a lot. It's just really...
I mean, I know we joke a lot, but yes, that is an incredibly important aspect of his character, is his butt. Like, it's almost his... it's almost his co-star.
Yeah, I really love this version of Robotnik. I don't know about who am I kidding? I know you guys love this version of Robotnik as well. It was just so strange.
I mean, that's, just one of the things about... I think part of the reason why Adventures Robotnik is so important is that, this was basically kind of the thing that established, like, Eggman, Robotnik, whatever you want to call him, you can portray him in such distinctly different ways, and it still, feels natural to the character. We'll talk in a moment about the other Robotnik that was around at that time, but even with it was just Game Robotnik and Adventures Robotnik, you had this big, very angry, distinctly evil-looking interpretation of the character that's on all the box art and the manuals and everything, and then you have this goofy goof-em-up version, and yet both of them still felt very distinctly Robotnik in some way or another, and I think that the strength of a character is that you can portray them in completely different ways, in completely different mediums, but it doesn't feel like it betrays the spirit of the character in that way.
Yeah.
In the same way that, like, you can have dark, brooding Batman and then corny Silver Age Adam West Batman. They're both still very much Batman.
Yeah. And to like tag along to what you were saying, Luke, I think like it was especially important for them to I mean, I know that, you know, the game Sonic was made in Japan, whereas the show was written in America, and we don't have to talk about the animation process because that's, yeah.
But neither here nor there.
Yeah.
It gets complicated.
Yeah, it sure does. But as far as like the styles of giving Robotnik a character, like in the games, you have the pretty straightforward thing of he's the bad guy, he's the boss that you fight, and so that gives him enough of a serious edge where you're just like, yeah, I'm Sonic and I'm going to beat the bad guy. But then you have the cartoon that's out at around the same time that, you know, gives him, like you said, like the big, goofy, super silly, extremely boisterous and confident version of Robotnik. And I think it was important back then, just as far as not only marketing, but establishing his character, to be able to give that character the freedom to be able to move between those two extremes of like, he can be super serious, but also he's a drunk baby stumbling into a china shop.
Which is really interesting, like not to leapfrog, but I think it is germane to go that both of the Robotniks, like you just mentioned, like the super edgy Greg Martin scary eyeballs and Adventures of Sonic are what make up StC Robotnik.
Yeah.
Who kind of splits the difference to where he starts out, we will get to Dr. Professor Ovi Kintabor, but starts out looking like a Greg Martin Robotnik, and then, undergoes a transformation and just straight up looks like Adventures of Sonic Robotnik for does he ever change again? I'm only
the design alters over time, but it's more or less still Adventures Robotnik.
And at least like for the first, for the majority of the original StC run, which is, the first 100 issues or so, doesn't do a lot of super funny stuff. Like funny things happen to him, but he is distinctly different from an Adventures Robotnik, even though that is where the design comes from. And I just think that's a good example of how it works. Like, you can put Robotnik in a lot of different situations, and his like strongest design elements always come out like shining, regardless if the character is supposed to be goofy or serious or a mix of both.
And in Adventures Robotnik, in a weird way, he was kind of closer to classic Eggman than the Greg Martin Western stylized version of Robotnik was, because he was like classic Eggman was always a bit silly.
Yeah,
I think like that's what you see from all the art is a silly little fat man.
I crack up any time in Adventures or StC where they literally either talk about like, oh, he smells like eggs or he loves eating eggs, and a lot of that stuff is from the Bible material, because I'm like, okay, they knew though, like they knew that he was Eggman, so they just decided to go with that weird aspect of it. Flashing back to the a sentence from one of those talking about eating disgusting undercooked sunny side up eggs with his hands and getting all over him. Oh boy.
Yeah, but I think that kind of does bring us to the opposite end of the spectrum of the Robotniks, because that's where we get into the other animated series, the Sonic the Hedgehog, aka SatAM, as the fans would call it, and like Adventures Robotnik is ostensibly the dictator of Mobius. At least they call him that in the stories, but we never see him like lording over the people. We just see him in his observatory, sort of like peering down at them, like in his big Long John boulder. But like, what we actually get in SatAM is the Robotnik that took over the world.
Yes, he blew it up. Damn you!
Damn you all to hell!
Yep.
And he revels in every single delicious, succulent second of his dictatorship.
Yes, like this is especially like revisiting it, I appreciate more now the campness of SatAM Robotnik, because he is like, growing up as a kid, you think he's the most evil, horrible thing ever, and then revisiting, you're like, oh, he gets a little silly sometimes. But yes, like the intention is that, oh no, he is pure evil. He would he would shoot his own grandma if it let him build one more robot factory on Mobius.
This is, and we've talked, like, in our previous SatAM episode where we were discussing Blast to the Past, about the differences they take from, like, what was established in Sonic at that point. And, like, the biggest thing being that he's called Julian. They don't take anything, they don't call him Ivo or Evo or anything like that. He's Julian and then Robotnik.
Not even in SatAM, not even Kintober, which Archie would throw in there. Yeah. But yeah, just Julian. The words of the king.
Julian.
Which is a weird one, but I mean, I guess I get it. Like, just part of his trying to appear babyface before his heel turn.
Right, yeah. So there's like, he introduces himself as Julian. It's like, oh, that's a friendly name. I can trust you. If he introduced himself as Robotnik, well, I'd be like, oh no, I don't know about that one.
Your name reminds me of the fries that I love so much. It's a stupid joke.
I appreciate
I get it.
Which, okay, now I'm realizing that, okay, for StC taking the funny Robotnik design and making him like a horrible fascist, Archie Sonic did the opposite, where they started with the SatAM design, but for like the first 30 issues, it was just goofy Looney Tunes bullshit.
It's kind of fun how they play with it in that way. Like, I do wonder what if things were a little bit different and we did have basically the StC thing of they did originally draw him as Adventures Robotnik in Archie, and so it starts looking like the little Golden Books things we read earlier.
Yeah.
And then StC was just like, when he comes out of the egg, he's SatAM Robotnik, and was like that through the end. It's an interesting what if, and I would love to see the universe where that ended up being the route they took.
Yeah, because Archie was just like, they were given like all this like Bible stuff for SatAM, but it was like really early SatAM that they were working with. So obviously they had this design of Robotnik on hand, but they were also told to tell a bunch of funny little stories about these little animal critters against this silly fat man. And so that's what we got. But we got that looking Robotnik. I think we talked about it before, but he's just the thought of SatAM Robotnik being like, oh, gadzooks, that pesky porcupine, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Yes. I think we specifically mention it when we were talking about Mecha Madness, where you have a lovingly rendered SatAM Robotnik by Patrick Spaziente, but he's saying like, oh, golly jillikers, almost bit the big one there. And it's again, but yeah, I'll say it again. There's a little bit of dissonance, but hey, like we said, that was just how it was back then. There was so much extra material that different licensed Sonic properties were just sticking their hand in the bag and pulling out whatever they had.
I mean, there's another version of the like another universe out there where, like, that's just what SatAM Eggman was. Like, the show we got, like, instead of Adventures and SatAM, was the silly one early on. And Jim Cummings is voicing Robotnik like Pete from the Disney cartoons.
Yeah.
That's right. The first one who captures the sneaky pest can name his own reward. I want that hedgehog.
And I don't know if I would mind that very much, actually. That would be pretty cool. But we can't really cover all of Archie Robotnik, because I just suppose over time he started becoming more like SatAM Robotnik. He started taking him a bit more seriously, I suppose, they say in quotes. But, the stories, we've talked a little bit about the strangeness of those.
It is funny because even thinking about, like, okay, when you think of the big serious story arc in Archie, you think of Endgame, right? And even in like the first issue of that, 47, where Princess Sally dies, there is still like a funny joke of SatAM Robotnik and Snively going down an emergency like slide to get to their escape vehicle. And I'm like, yeah, I still wouldn't think that like the Robotnik from SatAM would do that. That is too whimsical.
Yeah.
Although, you mentioned he got more like SatAM Robotnik, and I sure do think the Robotnik who nuked his entire planet to kill his version of Sonic was probably the closest to SatAM Robotnik.
And it is worth pointing out that pretty extreme version of Robotnik, because that is the Robotnik who would take over essentially for I would say the rest of the comics run, but at least until the reboot.
Yes.
When all of that was sent to the wayside where it belongs. But that's the Robotnik that comes back, and essentially that's the Robotnik who becomes Eggman in the comics.
Yes, he was a robot who uploaded his consciousness, then put himself in a new robot body that looked like Dr. Eggman, and then some other weird alien shenanigans happened, and he got turned into a fully organic being, and yeah, so over the course of another 30 to 40 issues, became the modern version of Dr. Eggman we know from the games, but he was a mean guy.
And eventually Ian Flynn would write for him, and he starts actually being a really interesting and terrifying character, but, well, I suppose we'll get to that. And we've briefly touched on it, but we might as well bring it up again. StC Robotnik, Sonic the Comic, Fleetway, whatever you want to call him, based specifically on the Sonic Bible idea of Robotnik, where he's just, as we mentioned, the little gross man eating eggs with his hands. I don't think that actually ever came up in StC.
But this is where Ovi Kintobor also makes his debut.
Yeah, we've talked in the Bibles. I love that we can keep going and we've talked about this in our previous episode, for just about every topic that we talk about now.
Yeah,
I feel like we're extending quite the lore here.
We've laid the groundwork, and now we stand upon it.
Yeah,
the house that Evo built.
But what we've got here is, like you mentioned, it's basically taking the idea of the Greg Martin Robotnik and sort of I'd say fleshing him out, but what they've actually gone and done was, the whole Kintobor story, as we know, is about him absorbing the evil of the Chaos Emeralds. So basically, what we don't get is, a complicated character with, interesting motives. We literally have a man who is bloated with evil and disgusting thoughts. It's not the most complex villain, but it's a scary one.
Yeah, I know I've brought it up in discussions of just the concept of Ovi Kintobor, but I always love the element of tragedy in using the Ovi Kintobor is corrupted into Evo Robotnik, because I'm kind of sad that I don't know of any aspect of Sonic from back then even use that as Sonic's friend is still down in there somewhere. Someday we'll fix him. I just like that. Even though it's not really a thing, I like that concept to where yes, he is literally the most evil villain possible because he absorbed all this evil, but maybe the goodness is still down in there somewhere. But
well, it didn't appear in StC, but we're going to get to a book one day that maybe plays into that a little bit. So I'm thinking that's something for you to look forward to, Jeremy.
Oh, okay. Yes, very much so.
I wonder what you could be referring to.
Because, I'd love that part of StC, but they do kind of cheat it by introducing that their computer has Kintobor in, and he never really gets to, he does some things, but then he gets forgotten for 30 issues at a time and then pops back up when they need him. And I always thought that's kind of a cop out. He's still there. He's just in the computer.
Robotnik, stop all the downloading.
Help computer.
I
will look forward to that someday.
But that is ended up being my interpretation of Robotnik. I'd obviously seen different versions, but that was the one I used to really like because I was a dumb kid and I was just like, haha, he's just really bad and terrible and horrible and gross. Yeah, that's what a villain should be. And technically speaking, I suppose in many ways, we shouldn't get away from that. The villain should be really gross, horrible people sometimes, because that's life, folks.
Yep. When you think, no real human being could possibly be this nakedly evil in their actions and deeds. Satire is dead.
So, but that, I think, we need to finally talk about the big egg in the room, and that's the one that we've seen for most of Robotnik/Eggman's existence in this world. This is an umbrella concept that covers so many versions, but we're just going to get into like the basic version of him right now. We're talking about the quote-unquote modern Eggman, the design which premiered in Sonic Adventure.
Yes, indeed. He doesn't have a cape anymore, but he's in full 3 dimensions, and you can really imagine the smell.
And we're not just talking about his model either.
He's got them big old toothpick legs, some kind of, who knows, jumpsuit, speed suit, weirdly designed but incredibly stylish red jacket with those big shoulder pads. What a guy.
While there's a certain iconic nature to the simplistic look of classic Eggman, which is where this sort of like springboarded off of, they did decide to distill down like a lot of like, here's an evil scientist who likes doing mechanical things, so here's his big evil jacket for riding around in the ships, and he's a mad scientist, so you can see from his silly glasses, and also he's got like the little goggles on his head, so you know that he does like welding work and stuff. They just sort of like really got the idea across, look at this man, he likes doing mechanical evil things, I suppose. That's probably what they were getting across with this design.
Yeah.
But he also has a sense of style and flair. I mean, you see his coattails.
Oh, that's true.
Yes, he's got them on the front and the back.
Yeah. He's got more tails than tails.
Honestly, like, maybe it's just because it's the one that I've gotten the most used to because it's been around for so long, but I love Modern Eggman. I love the design. I love the usual characterization. I feel like he is by far the most fully realized version of the character.
I agree. Even though I think there's like a few more details added to his design in the modern form than like in comparison to the classic form, I don't know. It feels like more streamlined and just more essential. And you know, that could just be the fact that we've at this point, we've definitely had way more years of this version of Eggman versus like the original Sonic the Hedgehog version of Eggman. But like, I don't know. It feels quintessential.
It's because of the tenure, like you're saying, like how much long we've had, and also like his appearance in very story-heavy games and story-heavy, like because that version, like we were just talking about, the version of classic Eggman/Robotnik didn't really appear in lots of the ancillary media of Sonic because they were making their own versions of him. So, whereas this version of Eggman, we see in all sorts of things.
Yeah, and I do feel like his design is the perfect complement to like Sonic's Sonic Adventure redesign, like stretching him out with the longer quills, the longer limbs, the green eyes, and then yes, kind of doing the same to Eggman, like it giving him a more humanoid build to where he is more Eggman shaped and less like, you know, a funny little rubber ball man.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just good. Like you said, he's been around so long, and even in like just the video games, like we have gotten so many different stories that show like the extremes of this Dr. Eggman's personality, from like, you know, whimsical silly stuff like in like the amusement park in Colors to like, you know, more serious stuff in Unleashed or like Frontiers recently. You know, even like Forces like shows a particular like insane side of Dr. Eggman that I like, where like, oh no, he's taken over the entire planet. Like this Eggman can still do that. Like, eat your heart out, SatAM Robotnik.
Yeah, they do bring that back for that game specifically.
Yeah.
And they don't do it again.
Yeah.
I really like this guy, even if he does tend to be like the final boss, unless he happens to be experimenting with some sort of like ancient god or, I don't know, some other villain who's more powerful than him, and that always ends up biting him almost every time.
Yeah.
A really big salamander.
He does have a bad habit of trusting where he really should not, let's say.
It's that Arrested Development clip where Tobias and Lindsay talking.
Well, did it work for those people?
No, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but but it might work for us.
Like every other time you've dug up an uncontrollable force of nature or evil, it's backfired, but not this time.
Well, like the hubris of Eggman is like a recurring thing.
Precisely.
Like, he never learns because he really does feel like this is the time I'm going to get it. I'm smart enough to do it this time. I've learned from my mistakes. I've done all the calculations. But no. And you know what? Doesn't mean he's an idiot, because he's a very smart man. Have you not seen his canonical IQ? I forget what it is, but it's
300.
pretty big.
300.
Oh, okay, there we go. And Tails, but then Tails is not far off as far as I know, so never mind.
It's also 300.
But he's a smart guy, but, he just... I don't think it speaks to his lack of intelligence, it's just his tunnel vision. Like, he's considered lots of stuff, but also he really wants to do it this time.
Yeah, no. And honestly, I think that's a really good character flaw. Like, he's got the means and the know-how to make this stuff happen, but, he gets so self-obsessed and, has that tunnel vision that he misses the obvious stuff right in front of him. And I think that's a great way of kind of beyond just Sonic wrecking his plans. It's nice that there's an element of part of it is foiled by his own hubris. I think that's a really interesting character trait.
If anything, it's his lack of emotional intelligence that does him in.
Yeah.
Like he's a smart guy. Like I love the wild interpretations of Robotnik that talk about like, oh yeah, he was the first to contact aliens with his homemade radio at age 4 or something. But no, like he's a self-obsessed, like, and I mean this in an affectionate, like funny way, and not like the dire modern interpretation. But he's a man-child. Like that's why he builds amusement parks. Like he takes over the world and builds giant roller coasters with his name on them, like because he wants. And we talked about like how good that teeny bit of lore in Frontiers is, where he's like, everyone should look at me because I'm so great. And I love that because it's a good contrast to some of the best interactions with Sonic. That Sonic is like a cool, like devil may care character, but he's also like at his best is emotionally intelligent, like because he's empathetic and knows like what his friends are thinking and stuff like that. And Eggman just has none of that. Like he makes his own friends in the form of like silly robot sidekicks and then doesn't understand why they're so bumbling. And it's like, my man.
But isn't it funny, like Sonic and Eggman are both like a bit headstrong a lot of the time and just like definitely don't look before they leap before diving into something. I feel like it's kind of funny that you've got that sort of reflection of each other.
Yeah.
I love their dynamic.
In preparation for this episode, I wanted to go back and like revisit a few like key things from especially Modern Eggman's like just tenure. And one of the things I went back and watched because I couldn't remember all the dialogue was the ending scene like during the credits of SA2. And it just reminded me that, like, with Modern Eggman, we also got to see, like, we talked earlier about, we got to see the two extremes of him either being super serious or super goofy. But even as early as SA2, we started to see him have more, funny enough, since he's the only human, more human elements to his character. Because at the end of SA2, he's starting to kind of wax poetic and philosophical about how, when he was growing up, he looked up to his grandfather, Gerald Robotnik, and like all of his accomplishments and everything. And then, after everything's said and done and after the smoke is cleared, he's like reflecting on it, and he literally says, did he really mean to destroy us? And like that shows some sort of self-reflection and some sort of analysis of not only his character but his family line. And that also ties into what we were talking about earlier about that little bit of lore that we get in Frontiers about how he feels about his cousin Maria.
Yeah, I think that is a great moment for Eggman in the reflection in the credits of Sonic Adventure 2, because I think he's, because even though Eggman does bad things in that same game, he does blow up half the moon, but I think he justifies it in his head that Oh, it wasn't that bad, and I even like the little mini arc you get in the Sonic X adaptation where he does fix the moon. So like that logic of like, oh no, he is committing terrorist acts against the entire Earth, but in the back of his head he's like, I can fix the moon. Like, don't worry about it.
He also, in the same game, he also blew up an island. He single-handedly invaded and almost destroyed a secret military base to get Shadow out.
Yes. But it was not as bad as destroying the entire planet out of bloodthirsty revenge like his grandfather. And so I do think that was a little bit of reflection on, like, of course Eggman goes on to, like, he will always justify his actions, but yeah, the fact that he saw his grandfather, like, call for the destruction of all humanity, well, that was just a little bit too far.
Yeah, I'm not actually about that.
Yeah, it also kind of reminds me of the, people pass it around a lot, but the clip from Sonic X where, Sonic does the whatever transformation, the dark supersonic, etc. And Eggman kind of comes in to rescue Sonic and his friends and basically tells him in so many words that, like, oh no, Sonic, you're better than this. Like, this isn't you. Like, it's the English dub, like, really softens it. I can't remember the exact line, but he basically says, like, you don't do this, Sonic. Like, you're letting your anger
leave this to the bad guys like me.
Yeah, basically. But I think he even has a line that says, like, you know what? I'm going to pretend I didn't even see anything and let your friends collect yourselves and go, because that kind of dips into the, like, Sonic and Eggman are lifelong sworn enemies, but also there is a kind of warped mutual respect there at the end of the day.
I do like that's probably true, but there's also a part in the back of my brain that's like, maybe he was like, oh god, another transformation, I'm gonna nip this one in the bud.
Yes, there you go. Like, he sees it on the monitor and he's like, oh boy, well, geez, what's some dumb hippie bullshit Sonic would say? Okay.
Honestly, though, I'm glad we are bringing up the Sonic X version of Eggman, because I feel like that is a version that really had a lot of opportunities to dive into kind of Eggman's character and some of his motivations. Like, I've talked about this before, but one of my favorite episodes of Sonic X is the one where they're in the chaotic startup cafe and Sonic and his friends are hanging out in there, because that one is one that, like, really does dig in on, Eggman's motivations and how he feels about Sonic, and just a lot of really kind of interesting pathos to the character.
There's a lot of good opportunities in Sonic X for Eggman to show his more comedic side, and I think it works in Sonic X more often than it doesn't when it gets really silly goofy, but it is nice to see that version of Eggman, like, do some funny stuff in that show.
Yeah.
Really is telling how much time we spent talking about this one iteration of Eggman. But that's because it covers so much ground. Really does. This is the Eggman / Robotnik that we've dealt with for so long, and we'll probably get more into the different interpretations of this version, but we should probably acknowledge the remaining ones that we should probably give some lip service to. And I feel like maybe now is a good time to talk about the Eggman from Sonic Boom, who is just a silly man.
He really is.
I love his design that is, like, very different. Like, compared to Game Eggman, Boom Eggman is more built like a brick house.
Yeah, like his design is kind of more military almost, and it's
kind of leaning into the dictator aspect that a lot
leaning
of
a little bit into, like,
ones.
an old-fashioned, like, action movies, like, villain, like, like of the day, or like, because they look at the mustache and you see him literally, you could see that guy literally twirling his mustache.
Yeah.
Yes.
He also, as far as his form factor, he hit the gym a little bit more. He's got some more gains up at the top, so
yeah, he's more of the inverted egg shape instead of
yeah.
This is sorry, women. This is what peak male performance looks like.
And I do love that just Boom as a whole, especially the show, is like, yes, these are like the game versions of these characters, but just tweaked ever so much to be more like comedic, and I love that about Boom Eggman. I love when he talks about his parents and his his bad childhood and just goofy stuff like that. And oh man, whenever I think of Boom Eggman, I think about the early episode where something goes wrong at his base and he asks Sonic and Tails if he can't sleep over in their hut.
Yeah, that was like the first episode.
Yeah, it's pretty early, and one of the gags is him sleeping on their couch, and he's snoring and cackling evilly when he exhales. It's a wonderful performance by Mike Pollock as well.
It's Mike Pollock getting us to show his comedic chops in a way that isn't like overly exaggerated as it often was in like the 4Kids anime dub. So he gets to just do these real like funny bits. Like I remember from the very same episode where like Amy comes up to him and asks him if he's eating his feelings.
Do you feel scared without a home? Do you feel alone? Are you eating your feelings?
Somebody get her away from me.
I always remember, I wish I could even remember like the contents of the whole episode, but I just remember this episode where Eggman, I think, takes Sonic to court and he's got like a cast on his arm, and there's just some really wild, crazy stuff happening in the court, and my friend and I were watching it, and we just like, we paused it and we're just like, what are we watching right now? And then we continued.
It's a simplified version of Eggman that just sort of like concentrates him down to the silliest parts of his character.
Yeah.
But I just really like it because it's like, it's a for the most part, Sonic Boom is just like a really low stakes story. And so we've got this little low stakes villain who can just literally sleep over at the hero's home, and it's fine.
It's like if you take the Adventures of Sonic Robotnik and then like made him just a little bit more mature, but still just as, if not sometimes more goofy.
It's if he's mellowed out in the years and he's just
that's like, a good way to put it.
I don't have time for this anymore, Sonic.
Yeah. You gonna let me take over the world or not? Let's cut to the chase.
I gave myself too many promotions. I ran out.
Yeah, I just like this version of Eggman. There's not a whole lot to say, and sadly I don't think we're going to see anything more of him, but you know, like, I feel like aspects of this Eggman, because it's just like a simplified version of the character with slightly different characterization and the chance to do silly things like talk about his father and things like that you know, it's just fine. And then we still see elements of this in current Eggman because there are plenty of chances for comedy from that guy.
Yeah.
Yes, that is the good thing about Boom, is if you tone down the comedy a little bit, you can transpose like a lot of the comedy from Boom to like modern game Sonic as well. You know, not as whackety schmackety, but still pretty funny. You could definitely give Eggman some of those jokes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty telling that Ian Flynn wrote a couple episodes for it, and obviously he got the characterization right away because all the characters are just simplified, sillier versions of their in-game selves. But I suppose we'll get into that in the future when we talk about Boom properly.
When we talk about Sonic F. I mean, Boom. Yes, Boom.
I feel like there's one more like alternate universe version of Robotnik / Eggman worth talking about, and that is the live-action movie Robotnik.
Yeah, it is.
Just Robotnik again, although he's called Eggman as a nickname, but he's Jim Carrey, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. I was just thinking that, and I think it was because I was reading some STC, is if there was an element they could have used, like, I'm surprised they didn't try and incorporate something with a version of Ovi Kintobor for movie Robotnik, because Jim Carrey kind of looks like some of those old Ovi illustrations.
Yeah, a little
and
bit.
I guess the teaser at the end of the first Sonic movie, you know, that leads into the second, where he is very much in a Dr. Eggman outfit. I was almost like, oh man, are they going to do it? Are they going to kind of, and they, not really, no. There's no acknowledgement of his like transformation into the the evil Dr. Robotnik Eggman, but I think they could have pulled it off. And, with how those movies go, like, I will not be surprised if they reference literally anything in Sonic's history. We'll see. We'll see.
Like, when you look at the original version as presented in the movie with the hair and the smaller mustache, he's like, they did make him like an egotistical tech bro who's sort of like really full of himself and really full of his inventions, and that kind of works for a modern version of Eggman, but he still is just a Jim Carrey-ass performance of this character.
Even in that second movie where he's dialed it up, I kind of still wanted a little bit more. I don't dislike it. It's just I wanted a little bit more sauce on it, I suppose. Because even in that first one where it is weird, where it's kind of a half measure where he has like. He has the badniks, but are very more, they look like Apple products. And then even in the second movie, they get they start to look more like animal badniks. And yeah, I think Jim Carrey's performance works fine, especially for that first movie, which is we've talked in our other Sonic movie discussions, is a good one of those movies with Sonic characters in it. Mm-hmm. We don't actually know for sure if he was serious about not coming back for the third movie, but I would say I'd miss it if it wasn't in a third movie, to see like just how far he dials up the Eggman part of the role for sure.
Maybe a few less Limp Bizkit jokes in the future.
I mean, we've covered it. That is the worst part, is the very awkward pop culture references. Like, it really brings it to a screeching halt.
What it comes down to is like, and we'll get into it, like we've gotten into it already, but they wanted to try and like build a character for Eggman that wasn't just like, as they described it, a mustache twirling supervillain. They wanted to make him a human character, but what they actually did is they literally made a real cartoon character because they got Jim Carrey to play him and come up with lines for him.
That's kind of been his thing for most of his career, for better or worse.
I do like the idea that he's this guy who always thinks he's always the smartest guy in the room, and that's why he's so full of himself and puts his face on everything. And it checks out, and it does kind of track with the Eggman that we know. But I feel like actually good characterizations of Eggman will be seen in other things than 90-minute movies starring Jim frickin' Carrey. And we like those movies, by the way. We really do. Oh, yeah. But
it's fine for what it is.
We're not coming to those movies for nuanced portrayal.
No.
No. At least not from the human characters. I feel like Tails and Knuckles got some pretty good character arcs that were treated with the seriousness and legitimacy that Sonic the Hedgehog demands.
It's just, when it comes down to like, when you're getting a movie version of a video game character, we could have done so much worse than what we got in those movies.
Yep. I really do think that it like there's some good star power already in the movie, but like Jim Carrey, his star power alone really brings just so much more, like in my mind, believe it or not, credibility to the Sonic movies. And I just love the fact that he attached himself to these movies, because we all know like Hollywood and stuff like that just does not have a good track record with video game movies in general. And I feel like if anybody were to know it, I feel like Jim Carrey would be at least fairly aware of that fact too. But like, just by him being him, but also him putting on the name Robotnik, I feel like it just works so perfectly for those movies. And like we said earlier, I can't wait to see just how much more he ramps it up for the third movie, because it, like, in retrospect, he's had like a gradual progression of just how Eggman-y he's gotten through the movies. Like, it, we said it at first, like he was very slick and I know everything kind of guy in the first movie, and he gets a little bit more crazy, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more, and especially in the second movie, more so and more so. And
does a lot of mushrooms.
Yes, does a lot of mushrooms. And now, I've got the jitters now. I'm excited to see what the third movie has, especially for Eggman.
I really hope he comes back then. I really hope his retirement is just a bit.
I think he's retired like 5 times.
Yes, I was going to say, not to get into it, but like, as far as him speaking as like a normal human making statements on social media, I don't like trust a word he says. He's, he's a character, that's for certain. I do think you're right. As much as like, especially this group, we would talk about the legitimacy of attaching like big Hollywood names to like animated children's movies. I do think you're right about the fact that they got Jim Carrey to put his name on like the poster for the Sonic movie of all things. that probably did like, talk about like people our age or a little older who like have kids and like, oh, Jim Carrey's gonna be in that Sonic movie? Well, I loved all his dumb crap from the 90s. Yeah, sign me up. Exactly. So
I remember Jim Carrey. I remember Sonic the Hedgehog. Yeah, from my childhood. I'm pretty sure that's what they were thinking when they thought this is like.
And they were right.
And Gangster's Paradise.
And yes, oh Lord. And I mean, I think you would really have to argue that they did not just like let him loose to do his Jim Carrey thing. Like, you could argue like, hey man, are you too old to do this anymore? But I think he did his Jim Carrey thing for certain. I don't think he phoned it in.
Oh yeah, no.
So yes, I too, I'm hoping he gets more Eggman crazy in the future.
Although maybe we'll get a nuanced Jim Carrey Eggman talking about his grandfather. You never know.
Yes. Oh no, where his entire thing is cyclical. We're moving out of the insane 90s movies and into his dramatic period. We're going to get an eternal sunshine performance out in Sonic the Hedgehog the movie 3.
Look, as long as we don't get, Dr. Eggman's the number 23, then okay.
No, boy.
It stinks.
Well, there is that one moment in The Grinch where he self-reflects and then he has a heart attack.
Yeah.
So that could happen for number 3.
Well, that covers just about the major Eggman. In terms of iterations of the character.
The Eggman?
Yeah, the Eggman. The Eggman family.
Dr. Eggman.
I feel like we need to get into, now we've covered all those, I just want to get into a few what I've listed as egg topics in the outline. And the first on the itinerary here is the Egg family, because we've touched on that briefly. We just did right a moment ago. Because he doesn't always have a family.
Yeah.
Certainly didn't in StC. They never really got into that. But in the games, of course, we find out about Maria and Gerald Robotnik, which sort of helped canonize the fact that he is, no matter what version, he is technically Robotnik when it comes down to it.
I love it so much. Every time I think about it, I love it more and more. The family Robotnik.
I mean, if you're going to pick one of the names to be his actual family name, I think Robotnik works maybe a little better than Eggman, unless, of course, you are, as we often joke, pronouncing it as Eggman. Which would be pretty good too, actually, now I think about it. In SatAM and Archie, he's got Snively, and the rest. Colin and the gang. And oh yeah, you added. We've got the addition, and AoStH has Mama Robotnik and Robotnik Jr. Wait, hang on a moment. I know Mama Robotnik is a legendary character, often revived thanks solely to the efforts of John Gray of the Archie and IDW Sonic comic
God
fame.
Bless him.
But Robotnik Jr., wasn't that a son that he made?
Yes, but at the same time, as we're going to establish, family is allowed to be artificially constructed.
That's what I was going to say. Before Sonic Frontiers and Sage, he was making his own, we acknowledged Omelette or Eggette, if you will, in the past. But yeah, he was actually making his own progeny early on. I'd forgotten about that.
Yes.
Yep.
And if you remember, he immediately rebels against his father and eventually falls in love and marries fellow badnik Breezy.
As you would expect from that character's story arc, yes.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Inevitable.
They set it up. They set it up in episode 3, and yeah, sure.
So, okay, so what is, like, the various families of Eggman, what do they say about him? What do they add to the character, do you think?
I will say if we were having this discussion even 5 months ago, I would probably have a very different perspective on the topic.
Yeah.
Yes, I was about to say the fact that Robotnik is directly related to Maria and Gerald seem to be until, like you were setting up, until Frontiers, to where we actually get to hear his brief thoughts on his cousin, just kind of seemed like a weird, like, oh yeah, Eggman Robotnik is his grandfather created the Ark, tried to doom the planet. Maria was Shadow's friend and caretaker and family, and it always just seemed like a matter-of-fact thing. Like, when you really think about it, like, Eggman did not have to be connected to them directly. But yeah, the fact that now we know that I don't even know if, like, was Dr. Eggman around as a young child when Maria was alive? Like, we're still not 100% sure, but we do know that he did know of her. Now we know, like, kind of resented the fact that she got so much attention for being murdered. Dr. Eggman, come on.
That is so petty and terrible. That's perfect.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. It's a special kind of comedic narcissism that fits Dr. Eggman so well. It reminds me of, like, a really dark Simpsons joke, like, from back in the day, like at Maria's funeral, and he just comes in, look at me, I'm great, I am so great, look at me.
It's like a Futurama joke where Bender comes in.
Oh yeah, talking about Fry's dead dog.
Poor Maria Grimes.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez, like, sorry. It's just the idea of Robotnik being like, oh, yeah, her funeral has to make it all about her.
Now that's a Boom Eggman joke.
Yeah. Maybe a bit dark for Boom, but I like it. Yeah, Eggman's one of the characters who's actually allowed to have family. Like, it's not a big part of, like, all the games. It's not like he's always talking about them, although he would if he and Flynn had his way, apparently.
And also at times makes no sense at all, like in back when they were trying to do the two worlds thing, and especially Sonic X, and you're like, now wait, hold on a second, don't think about this for any period of time of where Eggman came from.
I think it's always supposed to be implied that he's from Earth originally. Like, of course, now Earth is everything, so I guess that still works.
Uh-huh.
But, there's always that part of my brain that tries to be like, how do we make this work? I guess he went to Sonic's world at one point and then came back? I don't know.
He fell in a hole when he was a baby and ended up in Sonic's world.
Sonic's world.
So we asked the question, you asked the question up the top, like, what does his family say about him? I think if I was to be the guy who answers it straightforward, which I'm going to be right now, I think based on all of his relationships, whether it's SatAM and Archie, or if it's the video games up to a certain point, I would say, like, he's always, like, the most dominant positioned person of the family, and by saying that, I mean, like, he's the one who always is in charge and always is the more aggressive personality. But now that, of course, I feel like in future podcasts we're always going to be like, but now that we have Frontiers, but
I mean, it's kind of hard not to.
But now that we do have Frontiers, we get to see a much softer, more truly paternal version of Eggman because of Sage. And that's, we have that end credit scene in the game where Sage is going to come back in some form, and so now that we know that's going to be a really interesting character piece for Eggman to incorporate into his life going forward, into whatever games come after this.
I'm very excited to see the Sage's follow-up appearance and working her dynamic with Eggman more into a follow-up to Frontiers.
I think when it really comes down to it, like, if I'm truly going to directly answer the question that I posited at the beginning of this section as, what does Eggman's family say about him? The real answer is nothing, because they're all dead. Moving on.
I do want to give a special shout out to his extended family in Archie, the overlanders that take the Robotnik name, for absolutely hating his guts even before he became Dr. Robotnik. Like, if I'm remembering my Archie lore, and like the end game Supersonic Special number 6 uncut edition, like, they were straight up going to like arrest him and put him in prison for crimes against humanity, and he had to run away and like trick the furries into like accepting him as one of their own before he could just do all the same garbage to them and take over that part of the world. And God, I think after he becomes Eggman, a lot of his family comes back down from outer space. I think they were on like a space, like a lowercase a arc, and they come back down. They're like, there's nothing out there, and they're like, oh my goodness, it's Julian, our long lost son, and he's just like, hey, fuck all y'all, and turns them all into robot statues. I think I've brought that story up before. I still think it's very funny.
Yeah. Like, you bring in these characters that we don't want to see and then immediately get rid of them is what I like to see.
Kill them all. And there is a lot of good drama in SatAM in Archie of just like, Snively is his just... I mean, he's this weaselly little nephew who only sticks around because, like, he could not survive on his own. He is riding Uncle Julian's coattails until the minute he can stab him in the back.
But that's about it for Eggman's family, I think. Although this does lead us into, because SatAM Robotnik is known for, like, one of his major things, aside from his obvious sadism and weird sexually charged reads of his lines, is the fact that he's taken over the world. And we talked about the fact that, at least in that version, and SatAM in Archie, in StC, one of the major things about Robotnik is that he's a dictator who's taken over the world. It's been revisited quite a few times. We didn't actually touch on Underground, but that's also a thing, but I don't really want to spend too much time thinking about Underground right now.
Underground is just budget SatAM.
Yeah. Okay, we're adding Underground and the entirety of Sonic 06 to our topics we will get to eventually, but when we can do it without being mean the entire time. But yeah, like... What else is there to say about Underground Robotnik other than, as you just said, Luke, it's SatAM Robotnik done worse.
So it's got the same thing of he's the dictator of the world, and like that is like a recurring thing. Like, for the West introduced the idea that Robotnik is a dictator. Aside from like giving him the weird black eyes, why did they do that? Like, why was that a thing that came up? Is that just to give him more menace, to make him more of an actual threat?
I've never really thought about it. It sure feels like the default was to make the bad guy kind of someone who was already won, and so you have a scrappy group of freedom fighters, and that's a constant source of conflict for, like, plots. I mean, I'm thinking about like He-Man with Skeletor, who's kind of, has a huge hold on the kingdom in a lot of those original stories, and even reboots of He-Man, or like, oh geez, I'm just thinking about any cartoon from the 90s of Mighty Max or stuff like that, to where as long as your bad guy has already like achieved a huge victory, you can always come up with another plot of like, oh, but we're going to chip away at it a little bit at a time with our heroes.
Everybody loves an underdog story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, even, even though I think it predates it by a little bit, like Captain Planet, that was its whole thing, is having these huge over the top polluting villains that just love being evil for the sake of being evil. And they already have like, oh, you know, this guy, he's already dumping oil into the ocean, or he has huge factories, and oh, we got to send the Planeteers out to take this one little part of that down and achieve a victory over this villain. And I guess that might be a reason. Also, like, it's super easy to like, we as the 90s Western society agree that dictators that seize power are universally bad, and so having your villain be one of those is also like pretty easy shorthand. I would imagine that's where like in a lot of exaggeration in Western Robotnik's design comes from, is he does kind of have a over the top like military dictator costume on with his much longer cape and weird uniform and etc.
Yeah, I think that's just something they decided that gives the stories more stakes. That's why they decided to take this guy who's just going around trying to take over the world, and they're like, nope, you already did. Now you're trying to take it back. I think that is more interesting, and maybe that's why they've gone back to it a few times, like in Sonic Forces and in Sonic Prime in the alternate universe.
And I mean, you know, we poke at it a lot because there's a lot of holes in it, but it is a good example in Forces to where it just kind of doesn't work if you don't do anything with it. I almost think that Eggman Land in Sonic Unleashed and the amusement park in Sonic Colors is a better example of doing that in the games, because being a slog to play aside, Eggman Land in Sonic Unleashed is kind of a like, oh no, like we've kind of failed. Like he's already started. Like he has converted one of these continents to his own, you know, devious machinations. We gotta put a stop to this. And yeah, like in Sonic Colors, he has enslaved these poor, adorable little wisps. And like, oh no, he's already finished. Like we now have to disassemble this.
We never really talk about Eggman Land, like, in this. We've not actually brought it up, despite it being a big part of like Modern Eggman's character, and that's kind of like, yeah, like you said, it's a version of that where that's his goal. He's always talking about Eggman Land. He's been talking about it for a long time, or Robotnik Land if you're going by the dub of Sonic Adventure. The idea of like being this place that he takes over and turns into a giant theme park because he likes theme parks.
Yeah, or Robotropolis all the way back into the OVA, which in the Japanese version he says Eggman Land. That is the city he lives in.
I played so much Roller Coaster Tycoon as a kid, and I thought, I want to do this for real. Yeah.
Eggman is the kind of guy who would spend weeks setting up a Sim City and then turn all of the natural disasters up to 100%.
I built a roller coaster and then didn't build an end to it. I love watching all the civilians crash and burn. There's just something special about it that warms my heart.
The ride never ends.
Next, I'm going to build a Sims pool and set it on fire.
I made a theme park that has free admission, but the bathrooms are $100 to use.
Oh, no.
Insert a reference to Disneyland here. It's basically the same thing.
Yes. The most evil plan of all. Capitalism.
But yeah, I kind of like it, but I don't know if we always need it in Sonic media, but I feel like it's a great sort of, it sets goals for the protagonists to have to fight against and eventually take down, as would happen in various iterations of the Sonic media. You've got this big ominous thing, the Robotnik's taken over, and now you need to get rid of it, and like eventually you get rid of that, and hey, gives you more of a goal than just like, well, I'm here again with another funky robot, which is fine enough. But
I do like the threat though, because thinking of like zones like Chemical Plant, like that's the second zone in Sonic 2, and it's like the world in the games is big enough for Eggman to like establish these big factories, or like Oil Ocean where he's like, you know, sucking out natural resources from the planet. And like the world is big enough for him to get away with that until Sonic like stumbles upon it and goes, no, this is no good. I feel like in the games that just works a little bit better than like, oh, he's taken over the entire planet and like, oh boy, you're really working uphill. And
I mean, the logistics of that.
like we said, hey, we're just continuing to kind of shit on forces. But yeah, like it doesn't feel like the stakes are as high as they should be in forces. And again, just makes me not saying that they couldn't make it work. It's just, it doesn't in that game.
I'm going to start out by conquering a smaller region and, manage it until it can become self-sufficient and then work from there.
Yeah, but to be fair, like, Eggman wouldn't actually go with that. He's like, nope, taking it all over. What's the worst that can happen?
Okay, I was talking in circles there because I couldn't remember what I wanted to actually bring up, which is I love the egg bosses in late stage Archie Sonic, which are groups of not always, sometimes partially roboticized, but sometimes just flesh and blood Mobians who have basically like had where they live conquered by Dr. Eggman. And I'm sure there was some kind of devil's bargain where he said, like, you can either help me run or I can roboticize you as a robotic slave. And I think they did a lot of really fun stuff with that in Archie. You had lots of conflict. I believe there is a huge fight between, is it Bunny and her uncle?
Yep.
Who, like, she goes to visit, and it's slowly revealed that, like, oh, he's become one of Eggman's egg bosses, and, like, is trying to reason with Bunny, saying, like, look, like, this is the easiest thing. Just let's capture Sonic, hand him over to Eggman. It won't be that bad. And another like unfinished storyline that I just will forever like wonder what could have been was the story of Clove and her sister Cassia, the pronghorn deer.
Oh yeah.
Because Cassia was she's fully roboticized, but also like I don't remember the exact details, but was like roboticized because otherwise she would have died. Like she had some kind of horrible injury or like disease or disability. Kind of similar to like alternate world Bunny from Scourge's world, who also like instead of roboticized was like horribly crippled by a childhood disease. But yeah, and so you have like Clove became an egg boss with her sister basically to save her life. Like Eggman said, like, I could just turn her into a robot and robots don't die. And there was always in her interactions with Sonic like this bit of underpining, like, I don't really want to do this or I don't believe in this, but what else am I going to do? And yeah. I love that. I mean, we brought up the chinchilla.
Thunderbolt, the chinchilla, is about to bring her up. Yeah. Then there's the one who just loves Eggman.
Yes, loves him to death, is just, oh man. And it was a great just like aspect of those late Archie stories before the reboot that was like, and we kind of joked about satire and real people in the world, but yeah, there probably are people that would just be like, yeah, sure, let Eggman take over. She probably won't be that bad. Surely he won't roboticize me.
Yeah, I mean that's it. Like that's the sort of stuff which I like when we get these sort of Eggman stories. Is sort of like when a bad person takes over, what actually happens? It turns out lots of people are like, cool, I really wanted this. So
yeah. Look into some American newspaper headlines from the late 30s when things were happening in Europe.
Yeah. This is the most we've used that song.
I know, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Eggman episode.
That's what I am.
Yeah, but like,
hey, Eggman was never going to be that bad.
That's what we thought. When it comes down to it, like you talk about, we haven't really talked about stuff like the levels of evil when it comes to the different versions of Robotnik / Eggman. And we've got like the guy who roboticizes people, or even like when it's not roboticization, but it's like the StC style of like, I'm just putting people in badniks and they're aware of it the whole time and it's really bad. Or the Cybernik thing with Short Fuse, where he's like trapped inside a robot for the rest of his life. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah.
And he won't let you forget about that every time he shows up. But anyway, that's a topic for another time. But when depending on how evil you want your Robotnik to be, he can do some pretty messed up stuff.
Yeah, like we were talking earlier about how he's very self-reflective in Sonic Adventure 2 when he learns the tragic history of his family. He does also blow up Sonic and kill him earlier in that game after holding a gun on Amy,
Yep.
which you could make an argument is maybe a bridge too far, but I don't think it's that bad. He does send Sonic off with a funny laugh as he's finally gotten one over on him. But
joke's on you, Sonic. These were Nerf darts all along.
yeah,
Point.
The rubber bullets like in Yakuza 4.
Oh my god. Oh my god. I still love that stupid story.
Yeah.
I do think even SatAM Robotnik, which I think if we're drawing on our memories as children, we think is the most evil, hardcore, murderous, killmonger of a Robotnik ever to exist. But then you revisit the show and you're like, oh, he's still got some jokes. He can still be, he's comically evil. I don't think a purely murderous evil Eggman works because it's not being true to the flamboyancy of the character.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people will always point to a SatAM Robotnik and say, see, that's how I like my Robotnik to be. Pure evil, really nasty, roboticizing people. I don't like any of this Eggman that works with Sonic. That doesn't work for me. I'm like, well, that's because you don't like characters.
Yeah. I mean, and again, SatAM Robotnik is the same one who asks Snively, what's the color of my heart? And then opens his gross mouth with two uvulas and, you're drawing on your memory of a Robotnik that didn't actually exist. And, even at his worst in Archie, he's still got jokes. Or the parts in Archie, like the aforementioned Robo Robotnik, who like I said, dropped nuclear bombs over his entire planet to kill Sonic. That is its most melodramatic, silly, goofy shit. And it took them a long time to even get a balance to where it resembled a Dr. Eggman from the games and not just in looks only. Yeah. Sometimes not in looks if it was one of the bad artists.
I like that we've got all these different interpretations of Robotnik all over the years. I like that we've got really evil ones. I like that we've got the mixed ones that are later Archie, but before the reboot, where he's still very jovial and and he's got that silly look that you expect of him from the modern games. But there's he's doing sinister, nasty things. He does it with a smile. I always think of the operation scene with Lee and Dar. That's the kind of stuff which sticks with me. I'm like, you can have him be a real threat and also be really silly about it. He's got that sort of attitude to him. I just like different versions, different sides to the character.
Yeah, and especially that era of Archie as well, the panel that gets shared around a lot is Sonic, saying limit, I'll show you my limit, where he's run to the other side of the planet to throw himself into this Eggman robot that is attacking Knothole, and then loses. Sonic straight up loses, and Eggman is just absolutely elated and like you said, he is sinister with a smile. It's a good balance, but he's not flaying Sonic alive and displaying his corpse at the borders of Knothole as well.
No, he's only allowed to do that in arcade games.
Yeah, his death game.
I think this is going to be a reference that Luke will get. I think lots of fans really do want Sonic buckets of blood from their Sonic media, but we're not going to get that unless it's a fan thing, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah, I got no problem with people who want to do their own interpretations. Like, hey, I also grew up reading like edgy Sonic fanfics where, Robotnik would kill or create machines that would kill the freedom fighters. But the only issue is when the people earnestly are saying, like, you've already made the joke, like, see, Sega, this is what we want. Not me, buddy.
I think we'll just take a little time to talk about, like, because I've written on here, like, oh, why don't we talk about all the different versions of Modern Eggman, since it's such a wide-ranging concept. I think we have actually done that.
Yeah, we kind of did that.
Yeah, but, like, it's right here. The only one that I think that stands out as not really talked about is the way he's sort of a little different in IDW. Like, I feel like there is a difference between, like, late Archie Eggman and the IDW Eggman. And boy, the fans will let us know about when things are different in IDW.
Yeah, I think the same can be said for Sonic because, and I mean, the obvious answer is because IDW is a different continuity that is supposed to be, and now, like, it sure seems canonically, like, directly connected to the games. And as much as I love late stage Archie before and after the reboot, like, Ian, the head writer, and the editorial team were literally dealing with the decades of baggage that those characters had. Like, even though Eggman is a different Robotnik from the beginning of the Archie comics, there was still hundreds of issues of him, like, referencing his old backstory as Robo Robotnik and being this weird techno wizard building Terminator women and roboticizing Snively and all kinds of stuff. Sonic also had baggage to wear of the early comics of being not only a freedom fighter, but then, like, after the victory of Robotnik, being like he's basically a knight. Like, Sonic for a long time in those Archie comics is basically like a cop, and all of the baggage that comes with that title, and that is a lot of those and
not even a patrol car to show.
I was gonna say,
no, exactly.
That was
not even the cool stuff. He gets knighted, and I think he gets a crappy medal. But, I bring up, like, one of the early storylines after the switchover is, Tails' parents are back, and they are anti-monarchists. And Sonic, like, betrays Tails' friendship and tries to put his mom and dad in jail because they don't like the king and your girlfriend, Sonic. And, people talk about, like, how awkward that story is. And I'm like, yeah, I think it's supposed to be, like, because there is a huge conflict between, like, what we know as Sonic as a modern game character and, like, all of the Archie stuff. And so, anyway, all that to say that, like, yeah, of course they're different in IDW because they're almost different characters.
And IDW Eggman, we've talked about a little bit, like, the whole Mr. Tinker story and everything, but what I think it is, we started talking about Modern Eggman, talking about, like, how hubris is such a big part of his character and one of his, like, most interesting character traits. It's all there in this version of Eggman.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's like a big part of the whole Metal Virus arc, which I'm sure we'll get to one day, is just, like, Eggman fucking around and finding out and being like, well...
Yeah, basically.
At the same time, like, they do such a good job bringing out his cunning side because, and this is why I love IDW, is throwing new characters and concepts in there. Like, I will not spoil the resolution to Starline, the IDW character, but that is an example of where he basically thought he knew better than Dr. Eggman. Dr. Eggman is, what an immature child. I can't believe he doesn't see how he's self-sabotaging. And then there is a moment where Eggman, like, flips a switch and is like, oh, you thought you knew something, did you? You thought you knew something. And it's really good. I feel like there have been several moments in IDW where it's like, okay, yeah, he is still a smart guy.
I think one of the most interesting things about IDW Sonic, and I promise I'm saying this not in sort of any sort of backhanded way because Eggman and IDW is just really well written just in general, but I think one of the most interesting things as far as IDW Eggman and his legacy from the start and then going forward is he got introduced into the IDW series as Mr. Tinker, and that's a shadow that looms over him throughout his entire story. And like, of course, it doesn't make sense, and it's just not a good story trope to bring up Mr. Tinker every single chance you can, because then it gets too repetitive, it gets annoying. But just the fact that even though it was through amnesia, we had like a very kind Eggman who was very generous and very basically Santa Eggman, but in a good way. And the fact that, you know, we have Belle who like longs for basically her papa, you know, Mr. Tinker, and the fact that like when Sonic was like in the Metal Virus series talking to Metal Sonic, saying that like even Eggman had a chance to change, but you know, Metal Sonic was still an anus. It's just such a really interesting part of his history now that Mr. Tinker was a person at one point. And like there's little shadows every now and then where Eggman kind of reflects on that and almost seems a little bit longing for it, but then he remembers that he is the Eggman. And I hope that Mr. Tinker I hope that Mr. Tinker is a character shadow that does not get forgotten as IDW keeps forging ahead with more Sonic stories.
It's part of that. I think I said this all the way back in our Bible episode. It is that tragedy of Ovi Kintobor that I wished was in more media, whereas now it's Mr. Tinker. It is Sonic literally has a physical example when people that, you know, that is literally part of that storyline where SBO says like, it's still Eggman. And he's like, yeah, but he's not. And also, like you said, the Metal Virus, like I think several characters like talk to Sonic like and say like, you know, we could have ended this back when he was Mr. Tinker. We could have captured him, we could have put him, and he said like, yeah, but that wouldn't have been fair because he wasn't who he is now, and that's still inside him. And I think they've done a really good job with introducing Belle as a physical reminder of Mr. Tinker, but also, like you said, they're not bringing up Mr. Tinker like every time Eggman appears, but it is there, and it also is establishing that Eggman, at least if he doesn't remember everything he did as Mr. Tinker, at least knows of it to where he is making a conscious choice to continue being the Dr. Eggman that he is. So there is some of that morality in there. It's, you know, the philosophical choice of he is making the choice to not acknowledge that he could be better if he wanted to. And yeah, man, it's just a really nice, complicated bit to Dr. Eggman's character that I also really enjoy. And you know, I'm not saying it's going to happen ever, but it sure would be like a nice end game for the Sonic franchise as a whole to like him make a choice to either be Mr. Tinker or say like, oh, I could be a good person. I wouldn't even say good guy. Like, you know, the good guys are the bad guys. Like, he could be a good person if he chose that.
Well, if anyone is going to help bring that out of him, that'll probably be Sage.
Oh yeah,
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But now we've got that in the mix. It makes things very interesting. So I want to move on from this deep discussion of the morality of Dr. Eggman to move on talking about his silly little cronies. I just wanted to briefly touch on this because I think it's a fun little topic, and we haven't established it in this episode so far, but like Eggman usually works best when he's got someone to bounce off of, and he's like I think it started mainly in the Western media where he would have like either two bumbling idiot sidekicks, or he would have like one second in command under him. And like we've talked about Snively, there's Scratch and Grounder in AoStH, there's
Grimer.
There's Grimer in StC as well, that's true. Who is not just Snively, even if he was intended to be Snively originally. But when Nigel Kitching found out he didn't have to do Snively, he's like, oh, thank God, I'll boot my own character in.
I'll add my OC.
Yeah, as you would.
Long-standing Sonic tradition.
It is, and there's Sleet and Dingo, I suppose. Moving on, Deco and Boko, who are just characters taken from another anime, apparently.
Which is hilarious.
I did not know that.
Yeah, no, if you look at the picture, it's just them.
It's TMS recycling their designs.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's kind of fun, because, like, up until that point, the main example of Eggman cronies was Scratch and Grounder that everyone would refer to. And then they were just like, you had Scratch, Grounder, and Coconuts, and then you had like Deco, Boko, and Bokun, who kind of almost fit that role.
Oh my gosh.
What was the name of this anime again?
Kinkyu Hatsushin Saber Kids.
There you go.
Which was a 1990, like February 91 show, so well before Sonic X.
And they were just like, we got these designs.
Yeah, we've got these designs for Omega and Epsilon over here. Let's just carry these over.
Well, we can't reuse those names for reasons, but like over the years we've had like various sidekicks, I suppose, for Eggman, and I think they've always been interesting because it gives something for him to bounce off of. And Eggman works best when he's got someone to yell at, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Even fast forwarding all the way to movie Eggman, and Agent Stone has warmed his way into our hearts.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But the most like recurring ones now at this point, ever since, like, I suppose technically Sonic Unleashed, but they really got established in Sonic Colors as Orbot and Cubot, who have shown up, who are also in the Boom universe and in the Prime universe.
Yeah, they are.
Yes.
Yeah, by virtue of being the Sega-created sidekicks, they are now the sidekicks.
Yeah. And they seem to have a flexibility about them to where from game to game, they kind of change personalities to whatever is a funnier dynamic. Like you said, you mentioned it kind of started in Unleashed with the, the Proto Orbot.
Yeah, SA-55.
Yes. By the time you got to Colors, you had the shenanigans with Cubot's voice chip. And then in Boom and so forth, it's just like, oh, okay. It's a little more of the long-suffering one and the silly dumb one.
That's an old archetype that works.
It's true.
I think I do fit, like, I think some fans are sick of them at this point. I'm not. I think it's because they represent the sillier side of Sonic, and Sonic fans desperate need of a sense of humor these days.
Yeah.
I think I said in our Frontiers discussion, they get name dropped, but I cannot wait to see them interact directly with Sage.
Oh, yes.
I'm so
that's why I drew a little
excited.
comic of it.
Sibling rivalry.
Yeah, yes.
Why'd they call you Sage, huh? Is that something you put on eggs, I guess? I don't know. Something silly like that.
I do think that someday we're going to have to do an episode where we stack rank the various sidekicks over the years against one another.
Yeah, we can't spend too much time on this, but I just like when Robotnik's got people to get angry at. That isn't just Sonic.
Me too.
Because classic Eggman never really had anything like that aside from... Did he? Did he ever see anything like that in any of the iterations of classic Eggman?
Not really.
The closest these days, and it's funny, we talked about how classic Eggman didn't really show up in a lot of extra media. He's gotten more now than ever before in like various Mania cartoons and Sonic Origins. It sure seems like he gets paired up with Metal Sonic as his go-to lackey. Now, Metal Sonic doesn't exactly have a sparkling personality, but he's pretty close as far as a almost robot son. That looks just like his most hated rival.
Don't read into it.
But otherwise, no. And I feel like it's just much more fun when he's goofing around and getting angry at some sort of like something to vent his hatred on. It's just more like AoSTH, I feel, were the ones who started it with Scratch and Grounder, and we've got to stack rank these one day. Let's leave that for later, but I just like it.
Yeah.
I was going to have us touch on his, as I've written in the outline, his extremely tumultuous relationship with Sonic. I feel like we have covered that a fair bit, but do they work best as solely mortal enemies who hate each other, or do we like it when there's a bit of a camaraderie between them, almost making them rivals, even in spite of all the war crimes and apparent torture that he's inflicted upon Sonic over the years?
I did mean to say in our Eggman personality discussion that I also don't think it works if you swing him too far in the other way, like, and to where, oh, he's basically a good guy. Like, not to get on my soapbox, but there are several moments in the Sonic X dub that just file his edges down way too much. And I think the same is to be said with his relationship with Sonic, to where a balance is what works best. Like, you know, I already mentioned he does straight up murder him in Sonic Adventure 2, which, you know, like I said, that is maybe his most extreme. And, you know, we've already joked about how limp the fact that he tortured him for months in Sonic Forces is. But I hate to say it, man. I mean, the best example in the games is Frontiers, where Eggman's logs spell out that he does have a begrudging respect for Sonic, but does hate his guts in every other way. And, you know, even Sonic in that game, you know, still jokes around with him when they're collecting the emeralds on the last island, and still, you know, gives it back to him when he's talking about, like, well, I knew you'd be too slow to grab this one, so I got it for you. And he's, oh, well, I wouldn't want to disappoint you, Eggman.
I when I think of Sonic and Eggman, like nowadays, especially with the new, like the new relationship building in Frontiers, I immediately think of the scene from Dragon Ball Super where Goku brings back Frieza to help him fight in the basically the final tournament of the arc, and like you know, they give each other a really knowing, like, super hard punch in the gut to each other. Like,
oh yes,
like that, like that's their relationship. Just like they will work together, and they'll even like kind of smile and maybe joke together, but like I think they're both kind of ready to like sock it to each other as soon as possible as well.
That's a good example, because like well, I mean, we do see, because the movie that comes after that arc in Super is Frieza is revived, and he immediately tries to take over the universe again. Yep. So and Goku's right there to stop him.
Yeah.
But yeah, the same thing. I could see that, like, yes, at the worst of circumstances, they work together and have a begrudging respect for one another. But given the perfect situation, Eggman would absolutely shoot Sonic out into the vacuum of space.
It's just a prank, bro.
I do think that when you have a franchise like Sonic that is geared towards kids, it's more interesting if there is at least some kind of fun play between the main hero and the main villain, instead of just straight up having them be hated enemies, especially for something like Sonic that has always had that kind of comedic edge to it.
I think after all these years, yeah, like of the characterization of Eggman we had, it's better this way now.
If Mario and Bowser can have just as many times goofing on each other as they are, you know, having big climactic battles, then Sonic and Eggman can do the same.
Yeah, they do still qualify for the Olympics every few years.
Yep. And it's just more story and characteristically rich if they have that push and pull of some friendliness, mostly rivalness, and it's not one dimensional. Like you have layers that you can explore in different stories and different games.
And it also makes it when the moments where Eggman does like go quote unquote too far, like the end of Tails' campaign in Sonic Adventure, where he's like, I will just blow up the city and then I'm going to stomp this fox child with my spider mech. Or, you know, even in, you know, it is funny that they are very much cemented as more lighthearted games, but there are moments in Colors and Lost World where Eggman hurts Tails, where, you know, even in those games, Sonic is like, whoa, hold on, man, that's too far. Like, that's my friend. Yeah. You know, you can point it at me, not him, Eggman. And I think that makes those moments like more impactful when you have a nice balance of Sonic and Eggman's dynamic, and not just because the extreme is like SatAM, where Sonic is shaking his fist at the sky and saying, you know, one day Robotnik, you're going down. Like there's no room for them to be friendly rivals in that continuity.
No, especially when he's such a sexual deviant, you know. There's like I'm not a kink shaming kind of person, but Robotnik really does get off on all the horrible things he does to the planet. So I don't know. At that point, he's a bit too far gone.
God, I can't remember the episode where he literally goes, "Oh, that's good. Oh, that's very, very good indeed." And like, yeah, we get it. He loves being evil.
So I think we're wrapping this up now. I just want to sort of like the conclusion I've written here on the outline is let you finish.
So good.
I just wanted to make things eggy, apparently.
I might as well egg you on.
Yeah. Okay, so what we've got here is when it comes down to it, what is the legacy of Eggman? Like, how do you think people, like general people, remember Eggman? Do they even remember him as Eggman at all?
I think so. Like, we've acknowledged it, but haven't really put a number on it. But he has been Dr. Eggman, the modern incarnation, longer than he was a classic Dr. Robotnik now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know. I'm just speculating. I bet you could put up a picture of a Dr. Eggman, and people would be able to identify him and be able to tell you, like, oh yeah, he's the bad guy in Sonic. He builds evil robots and laughs really loudly.
I do feel like there are a lot of people who haven't moved on from Robotnik, and I feel like the makers of the movie maybe are a bit like that too. There are many people who I meet these days like, oh yeah, Sonic, and when you're fighting Dr. Robotnik, I'm like, wait, you still call him that? Okay. But maybe that's older people that I'm encountering. I feel like most of the kids know him as Eggman now, but I think for the people who are, I guess it's for the people who were around during the 90s, they always saw him as, it's Robotnik.
Although, you said, the movie's kind of blurring that line now. Yeah,
you can literally buy Robotnik toys again. Well, actually, no, I don't know if you could even buy them back in the day. So, yeah, it's more solidified as Robotnik in the West sometimes than it is Eggman. It's weird.
I think it is a cool thing where I think we are finally, like, the games have embraced the Robotnik family name as well. And he's just both. I do love my favorite example that I think is friend of the show, Dave Ballmer, who he leans into it, but just like modern Sonic might as well just not exist to him. And when he makes jokes about it. That is my favorite running routine of Dave's. And you know, because it's Dave, we know it's all in good fun. He's not one of those old school Sonic fans.
He's played his Frontiers. He likes it. So there's still hope for our boy.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's a joke. Like, anytime anything past STC comes up on StC TP, 9 times out of 10, he just jokes about, like, oh, well, yeah, but that didn't happen.
But, what's next for Eggman, do you think?
Fatherhood.
Probably trying to take over the world again. You know, just a guess.
Yeah, probably.
It's hard to say if we're going to see any major divergences for Eggman, because when you get down to it, up to this point, he's kind of been on the same path he has been for the last, 20 years or whatever. New scheme coming down the line, then Sonic comes by to take it down, rinse, repeat. But I do feel like we are at an interesting crossroads for Eggman's portrayal because of Frontiers and what they have been doing with Sage and how they're setting that up. And I'm interested to see if that ends up having a big effect on how Eggman conducts himself in his schemes or how he might approach his next big plan for world domination, or even if this leads to kind of a big paradigm shift where he's either going at things completely differently or he becomes like maybe somebody else comes along. He becomes more of a kind of wild card force instead.
I don't mind that idea, actually. That would be pretty cool.
I mean, somebody better, like somebody new that's better than just another Deadly Six.
I mean, wouldn't it be funny if we just had like a Robotnik style villain who showed up who's just evil, and Eggman's like, whoa, that's a bit too much. That would be something.
Okay, I don't mean to ruin this, but that is kind of what they tried to do with Eggman Nega from
Oh, we
Blaze's
didn't even
dimension.
talk about him.
Yeah, we did completely neglect Eggman Nega. His
Yeah, because Sega's quietly retiring him as well.
his descendant / alternate universe counterpart. It's complicated.
I felt like the most interesting thing about him is that they kind of played with that he sees his ancestor counterpart as a buffoon. I remember reading some pretty cool fan fiction when I was 15.
I know the exact one you're talking about.
Yeah, that made him a threat by not making past Eggman's mistakes. But, I mean, look, I am not familiar with the story of the Sonic Rivals games on the PSP where Eggman Nega was featured heavily, but I just don't think they did much interesting things with him.
The one thing that they seem to do pretty consistently is that they portray him as much more ruthless than vanilla Eggman. Like Rush Adventure, he and Eggman team up to take over Blaze's world, but at the end of the final battle, he's ready to just use the machine to blow up the entire Blaze's dimension, even though Eggman's like, what? No, you'll kill us both. He's like, I don't even care anymore. And then the Rivals games, the first one is like, yeah, I'm going to turn all these things and then eventually the world into a card just so I can use time travel to erase all of Eggman's defeats from history and restore the good, put some sauce back on the name Eggman, basically. And then the second one, he's like, oh yeah, no, I'm kidnapping all these Chow to feed to a giant extra-dimensional monster that I can summon and have burn the world to the ground. And Eggman's like, yo, I didn't sign up for this. Shadow Metal Sonic, go deal with this. And so yeah, the one consistent thing about Eggman Nega is that he's willing to take things a step further than vanilla Eggman ever was. Like for all of his, ambitions, he's only out to conquer the world, not destroy it, whereas his counterpart / descendant has no such qualms.
And I think, like you said, I think that dynamic works better with a character who is literally not an alternate version of our Dr. Eggman.
Yeah.
Like if you have like I said, the Starline in IDW has shades of that. And I like that dynamic to, again, not necessarily show that our Dr. Eggman is wimpy or doesn't go far enough, but just he's more complex than he seems as a villain. And I think I agree with you. I think that dynamic could work in a future title or something.
Sorry, I'm looking at a picture of Eggman Nega here, and not only do they reference his old classic cape design almost with the yellow triangles, but there's also his shoes have got a bumblebee design, so it really goes back to classic Eggman, before the games came out. The Bumblebee Man, he's back.
Aye, aye, aye.
I never put that together. That is pretty neat. If that is intentional, that is, even if it's not intentional, that is pretty neat.
Yeah.
But I don't think we need to bring him back anytime soon. We can have a cool concept like that without this version.
I would like to see him come back in a comic arc, but I don't think we need to see him back in a game outside of as an opponent in the Olympics.
I was about to say, I can't believe they invited this guy multiple times. Jeez. Really need to look into the ethics of the Olympic Committee there.
Well,
yeah, you're not wrong, but not for the reasons you think.
Yeah, jeez. Too many real world tragedies referenced in this episode.
Sorry, an investigative reporter really gets in to find out. The dark story behind the Olympics is okay, Olympic Committee, I want to know the truth. Why do you keep inviting Eggman Nega from the Sonic games? Well, that's the reason he can't come back in the comics. But anyway, I didn't want to end this on Eggman Nega, but I guess that's a sign that we need to wrap up. Anyway, Eggman, I like him.
Ultimately, the point is that, I don't see Eggman changing too substantially from what we've come to know him as up to this point. But I think there is room, with the way they have set things up now, to go in some really interesting directions and to really shake up that dynamic potentially. I'm interested to see what, if anything, they decide to do when even, the DLC for Frontiers comes around, if not the next game.
Yeah.
True. Might not have to wait that long.
I do want to say a fun idea that I had from a little bit earlier discussion about what if like another Robotnik style villain comes in and he's pure evil. I think a really fun story element that they could implement with that is maybe like Eggman is starting to like get softer and maybe he doesn't have his grand ideas that he wants to pursue anymore. And then this new guy comes in and it kind of resparks his desires for world domination. He says, if anybody's going to take over this world, it's me. Get out of here, kind of thing, you know? That's something I would be interested in seeing, especially with the now paternal aspect of Sage in the mix.
Sorry, I just like that. I like the idea of a new character coming in and saying, Eggman, you're too soft-boiled now for this job.
Yeah. And I like that aspect of Eggman's character to where now I think more than ever you can say that, like, well, he doesn't want to destroy the world because if he does, then there will be nobody to give him attention.
Yeah.
And that is part of what he desires.
Yeah, like if there's one thing that has kind of been a consistent thing all this time is that Eggman is a complete egotist.
Yes.
Well, he certainly keeps our attention, so mission accomplished there, Eggman.
Amen to that.
I look forward to the future for this terrible, incredibly charismatic, weird man. Isn't it strange that a big fat man with a bald head and a giant mustache has inspired this much discussion? That's just how great he is!
Yep.
It's his living legacy.
Eggman has always been my favorite character, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah. I like it, like, the impetus for this whole episode really came from just the thought of, you know, since we wanted to celebrate Sonic's 32nd birthday anniversary, like, what is a hero without a good villain? And like Eggman's honestly just about as good as they come as far as like villains that balance out their hero counterparts.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's just an Eggman.
That's what he am.
Yep.
Thank you for the setup there.
All right, we got to get out of here. Let's let's plug our socials. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find us all on the internet. You can find me on Twitter and various things as Faulerro. That's Faulerro.
Love the jingle. You could you can find me as Rock the Jake on the various socials such as Twitter and Instagram, on YouTube, and you can find me on Twitch as Mr. Rock the Jake.
You can find me on Twitter at Cyberlink420.
And you can find me on the internet at large under the name Game Buddy, sometimes with a 123, and on Twitter at Great Job Jeremy. That's GR and the number 8.
And a special thanks, as always, goes out to Amy Waters for the use of our theme song from the album Gotta Go Slow. You can check out more of her work on YouTube and Bandcamp, and you're sure it's great.
Absolutely.
And please remember to subscribe, review, share, etc. The social begging is always very annoying, but we just want you people to acknowledge us, please.
We're desperate.
We've been talking about Eggman for 3 hours, basically. Isn't that worth your... No. If you like our podcast, just be sure to tell people and do things. It makes a difference if you like and review and share and things. It's nice.
Yeah.
And for our next episode, well... You know what? We've been listening. You guys have been asking, and I think it's only fair that we finally just go right ahead and do it. We are on the Sonic F channel finally going to talk about Sonic X, the comic series. We're going to talk about a story arc in the comic series of Sonic X, produced by Archie. We're dipping our toes into Sonic X, and this is how we're going to start. And what are we going to talk about? Luke, you had an idea for it. Why don't you tell us what we're going to do?
So, when I think of the Sonic X comics, there is one image that just stands out above all others. And I think that the people who know that series know what I'm talking about. It is the majesty of the one, the only, El Gran Gordo.
That's where Eggman becomes a... by night luchador, I believe. So
yes,
that's really interesting to me specifically.
Yes, that is all. Even before I read any of the Archie Sonic X comics, that cover of Eggman in the full El Gran Gordo getup has just always stuck with me, and I am super eager to dig in on those specific stories because they are just so much fun.
I hope you're here to join us on Eggman Month, apparently.
Egg month, if you will.
Yeah, Egg Month. It's, oh man, June is Egg Month. I like that.
I'm excited. I feel like those Sonic X comics do not get brought up in the same conversation as lost Archie Sonic issues, and doggone it, those Sonic X comics are really fun. So yes, I'm very much excited to revisit those officially on the show.
And I've never read them, so this will be a whole new experience for me.
Yeah, I just like introducing things to Jake. That's my enjoyment.
That's really what part of this podcast is all about anyway.
But until then, and until next time, I have been Faulerro.
I have been Rock the Jake.
I'm Cyberlink.
And I'm Game Buddy. And give me a break. What is up with all this drama?
Well,
It's a day ending in Y. That's the answer.
this has been The Hill is Always Greener, and we'll see you on the other side.
Yay!